Has anyone here ever had a plan before? The last couple of weeks have been, Ian has definitely had a plan, and nothing has went according to Ian's plan. 2 weeks ago, where I work at, we had this huge project, a piece of equipment that we needed to purchase, and we thought everything was A-OK, everything was approved. I was so confident in it, I took a week off to be with our newborn baby and my beautiful wife, who had just given birth to said baby. And I get back to work that following week, and on Tuesday our CEO comes down and says, basically, I don't trust the Chattanooga plant with money. You all don't know what to do with it. Seems like you waste it. You're going to have to prove to me that you can have money. 2 days later, our business unit manager came to me and said, hey, I know that Scott told us that we can't have any money, but we want you to go down to Atlanta and convince him that we need $3 million. Now, I had practiced as a teenager going and asking for $10 for gas money and got pretty good at it by offering services of mowing the yard or things I was already supposed to do. I'm not really sure how to ask for $3 million. He said, don't worry about it. We'll go with you. But we need to put a presentation together. We'd really like for the engineer that's involved to really lead the way. So I get with one of my engineers, and I have Brian put together a presentation, and Brian goes through, and he puts together, it's just an awesome presentation. It's very convincing. We need $3 million. You're going to give us $3 million. Here's what we're going to do with it, and here's how it's going to help the company. And so we get done with the presentation, and a couple of the managers come up and say, hey, Brian doesn't need to do the presentation. You do. Okay. So later this afternoon, I'm going to be driving down to Atlanta because 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with the board of directors of our company to ask for $3 million. And I thought that was a big deal. The week progressed, and we were planning for this big journey group thing to happen yesterday over at Chester Frost Park. And I was actually pretty pumped about it. I actually kept Sully from having a nap because I was going to take him with me to the park early. We were going to get set up. We get to Chester Frost. It is beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. 2 o'clock, Bio sends me a message. Hey, are we still going to do this thing? I said, absolutely. It is beautiful. I sent him a picture. He goes, it is pouring in downtown. I said, it's downtown. Don't worry about it, Bio. Just get your stuff. Come on. Tyler sends me a message from Walmart. Hey, I'm getting the food, but it sounds like it's storming here. Sure we're going to do this? I said, it's fantastic. Joey Veloz comes over. Me and him are getting set up, and we hear boom off in the distance. I said, it's thunder. It's probably in Saudi. Don't worry about it. And I finally get Tyler, send a message out to everybody. We're doing this thing. People are going to show up. We're going to have a great time at the park. We're going to talk about journey groups and share time with each other. And about the time Tyler rolls up with all the food and we're getting ready, we can see the rain coming across the water. And Joey goes, hey, we may want to take cover here. And I was like, don't worry about it. We got this. I look, and everyone else is in the car, including Sully. And so we're hustling everybody up. It absolute downpours. So it's another plan I had that just wasn't going according to what I wanted or what I had planned. Well, last night about 8 o'clock, I get a message from Karen Price saying, hey, you need to call David. David's father's in ICU, and he really needs to be there. I said, well, of course, I can convince David to go to Mississippi. Why not? So I call David, and I'm like, hey, if your father's sick, you need to get down there. He's like, well, I'm worried about what to do for tomorrow for the service. I was like, don't worry. We'll find somebody to cover it. No problem. Hey, everybody. So I talked with TJ last night. TJ had the notes from David, and so I've been preparing for this since 8 o'clock last night. And by preparing, I mean I've been really going over David's notes. I've read this part of Esther a couple times. Esther is not a book of the Bible that I am by any means an expert on. So usually when I preach, I feel really prepared, and I'm up here, and I don't look at my notes a lot. There's going to be a lot of me looking at notes this morning. I'm just warning everybody now. I will say this is the second least notice I've had to preach, and just one more just sort of lighten the mood story here this morning. In Byrdstown, where Heather grew up, I volunteered to be part of their youth ministry, really just start a youth ministry. And the Sunday that Ivan, our pastor, decided to announce that, he right as we were doing after we sang, he said, Ian, I want you to come up here, introduce me, told a little bit about who I was. Heather and I have been married for a couple months. He said, hey, I just want to introduce you and say, this is our new youth leader. Get to know Ian. He's a good, strong Christian man. he's going to be good for our youth. Ivan gets up to preach, and honest to goodness, he gets up behind a little podium like this, and he says, guys, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to ask my wife, Carol, to come up now. And he starts holding his chest. He goes, I may be having a heart attack, not sure. I'm going to ask her to take me to the hospital. Jack was our lead deacon. Jack, if you could come up and lead us in prayer and just sort of lead the rest of the way. Jack gets up, walks up to the front, and goes, everybody, let's pray for Ivan here. Ian, when we're done praying, if you don't care to come up and just share a word with everybody, you sort of close out the service for us. So I remember looking in the back of the pew, pulling the Bible out, and just frantically flipping. That's like I told Heather. I said, start praying. I don't know what I'm going to do here. I have nothing to go on here. So at least this morning, there's some preparation. And I know David's plan here was to start this series in Esther, and his plans changed as well. I think it's important that as we go into Esther that we really recognize God is in control. And if there's anything you get from this, it is that God is in control. And God uses all sorts of just common day things to put his plan in action. And so when we introduce the book of Esther, there's really some debate of whether or why Esther is even in the canon here. Why is it there? There's no mention of God in the book. There's no mention of Jerusalem or even the temple in the book of Esther. No one prays or even seems concerned about their relationship with God. Esther and Mordecai both are unlike any other of the heroes or heroines in Scripture. Esther is unconcerned about the dietary laws of the time, especially when she's taking in front of the king, the pagan king. She has no concern. She actually conceals her Jewish identity. It seems strange. We think about the other folks in the Bible that we sort of look at as examples. We don't really view them as hiding their identity. She loses her virginity to the pagan king. And we all know that's not something that we would think of as very heroic. She reluctantly risked her life only after being convinced by Mordecai that she's going to die anyhow. She displays a surprising attitude of brutality, wanting a massacre in Susa to last another day so that the son of Haman can be impaled on the city gate. Mordecai's refusal to bow before Haman is what put the Jews in jeopardy to begin with. Sort of started the whole issue here. Mordecai's the one who insisted that Esther conceal her identity, even though it meant compromising whatever faith she may have. And there's no clue given on what the motives of the thoughts are of either of these two, of Esther or Mordecai. There's really nothing that tells us what were they thinking. All of this points to the fact that Esther, who the book's named after, and Mordecai are not really the stars of the show. Even though he is never mentioned, nor apparently shows up, God is the main character. God is the hero. He is the star. It's all about his sovereign work and his providential acts. Notice I didn't say his miraculous acts. The providential, it's just the things that happen. I want to make it rain just enough so that Ian can go home and be there for a phone call that he needs to be there for. Otherwise, who knows how long I'd have been at the park. I may not even have my phone with me. John W. Whitcomb, author of a book, Esther and the Destiny of Israel, suggests a significance for the book and also reasons for the lack of God's name being mentioned in the book. He says, it must not be forgotten that if Haman's plot had succeeded, not only Jews in Susa, but also the theocratic community in Jerusalem would have been wiped out. No Purim would have meant no Israel, which would mean no Christianity. Why then were God's name and all theocratic ideas obviously and meticulously avoided through the book? It was not because God's presence was vague or uncertain, nor is it because thousands of Gentiles died at the hands of the Jews, nor was it even because the Jewish hero or heroine of the book were probably regenerate. The Esther story is an example of how at one crucial moment in history, the covenant promises God had made were fulfilled, not by his miraculous intervention, but through completely ordinary events. Just day-to-day living. Esther's very reminiscent of the book of Judges, in that those that are used by God are flawed, maybe even unregenerate. And he uses them to bring around his redemptive purpose for his people, for Israel. The preservation of Israel for the sake of the coming Messiah seems certain, even from the apparently irrational refusal of Queen Vashti to appear before the king when summoned, leading to her dismissal and leaving an opening for God to place Esther in the vacancy. So if we look at the history of what's going on in this time in the book of Esther, this is set during the exile of the Jews by King Nebuchadnezzar, 586 BC-ish. I don't know if BC-ish is a word. It's going to be this morning. The overflow was the fulfillment of the covenant curse on the sin and disobedience of the people. The book of Esther subtly addresses the question of the covenant from the perspective of those who did not, for whatever reason, return back to Jerusalem. There was a call to come back to Jerusalem. For some reason, there's this group of Jews that don't return. And so we keep talking about Susa. That's located in what modern day would be Iran. And it's in the court of the Persian king Ahasuerus, whose Greek name may be a little bit more familiar, which is Xerxes the First, or Xerxes I, as I referred to him earlier today. Much is known about Xerxes because of Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote the history of the Persian Wars just 25 years after the reign of Xerxes. There's no author mentioned or known to date for the book of Esther, but it's almost certainly written by a Jew who lived outside of Palestine under the Persian rule, and who was familiar with Susa and the Persian court. There's just too many details in the book for it not to be somebody that was in that area and understood what was going on during that time. The book opens with the phrase, "This is what happened during the time of Xerxes," suggesting that it was written long after Xerxes was king. The author of the book also knew when he began to write that there was a telling how, against all odds, the fate of God's people was reversed and became the reason for the celebration called Purim. One seemingly insignificant event after another. Just little tiny things that we probably wouldn't really even think about just keep piling up in this mysterious chain of human actions, and the promise of the covenant made long before between God and his people was upheld and fulfilled through those actions. It's worth noting the event that the author begins to tell this story. The author doesn't begin with Mordecai. The author doesn't begin with Esther. He doesn't retell the history of the Jews. He begins with the Persian king Xerxes, who neither knew nor worshiped God. It's kind of weird to think about that in our Bible, when we look at it, that there's a story here that focuses on someone right off the bat who doesn't know God, doesn't worship God. That's where we're going to start the story. He begins the story with Xerxes deciding to give a banquet, apparently from just a purely political need to rally up support for this huge military campaign that he's going to put forth. He's a completely pagan king who decides for purely worldly reasons to give a banquet designed to magnify himself. That's what he wants to do. He wants everyone to know, I am the King Xerxes. Look at all this wealth we have. Look at how great we are. And I need your support. And for many, many, many days, as Lois pointed out to me this morning, she's like, what in the world is going on for 180 days to bring up support for somebody? That is a really, really long party. I get tired if people are at the house for 3 hours. I can't imagine having like 180 days, just keep it rolling. Come on, Bio. The party's still going. So with his one decision to display the Queen Vashti at his war council, Xerxes sets in motion a chain of events that culminates in the deliverance of God's people, fulfilling the promise of the ancient covenant made ages before in an area of the world that's far away from where they're at now. When we think of redemptive history, we think of the great miracles that display God's power. Think about the parting of the sea. We think about water coming from a rock. We think about just manna just raining down. Think about quail being available. That one still just blows my mind. We think about all these miraculous events that God put forth in this redemptive history. And yet in this book we see these just, really it just seems like insignificant events in this great mysterious chain that fulfill God's purpose. Like Xerxes long ago, modern kings, presidents, and rulers make decisions for purely political motives. And like Vashti, people today unwittingly make decisions that have long-reaching consequences far beyond what they could have foreseen. These events may be completely secular and perhaps made by people who give Christ no thought. Nonetheless, through them, God is moving all of history forward to accomplish all that must happen before the return of his Son, Jesus Christ, the true King of Kings. Let's go to the first 4 verses here of 1. And when David was talking with the elders on Tuesday about how to sort of split up Esther, he really talked about it in movements. There's different movements that take place. And this first movement this morning is really just preparing things for Esther. So we read in these first 4 verses. These events took place during the days of Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, who ruled 127 provinces from India to Cush. In those days, King Ahasuerus reigned and from his royal throne in the fortress of Susa. He held a feast in the 3rd year of his reign for all of his officials and staff, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and the officials from the provinces. He displayed the glorious wealth of his kingdom and the magnificent splendor of his greatness for a total of 180 days. So it wasn't just a parade. And TJ and I are constantly talking about Disney movies and how we can use them as examples. I think of the movie Aladdin, and they're this big parade to show how wealthy they are as they come in to try to impress the princess. And everybody wants to be bigger, more extravagant. But it lasts for like 5 minutes. I know it's a cartoon, but it's like 5 minutes. It's a display of, okay, bring the next one on. This is 180 days. How much wealth is there that you have 180 days to show it and still have something to do later? You're planning a military campaign after this. He spent 180 days rousing up armies, trying to get everybody built up for his cause. It's not just a 180-day party, and then they're going to go to war, and he's wanting everybody to be supportive of what he's doing. Not only that, he's planning a war with the Greeks. It's not a small thing he's going to go do. In verse 4, again, it says, the glorious wealth of his kingdom, the magnificent splendor of his greatness. He was a man with a plan to conquer the world. That was his plan. When he woke up on day 1 there, in the 3rd year of his reign, the plan was take over the world. There appeared to be no one who would question him, outsmart him, or conquer him. His plan was to woo everyone around him, have them pledge their allegiance to him, and do their bidding. Surely, he thought, if all of his officials and staff, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles, and the officials from the provinces saw his great wealth and splendor, they would readily serve him and do his bidding. If I can just woo them with the largest, most extravagant party of all time for 180 days, no restrictions, as we'll see in a few verses, of what's available to them, then how can I be conquered? We look at these verses and we can see how easy it is to become enamored with the wealth and power of the world. We can see how tempting it is to grow weak-kneed by those who wield it. Somebody with great power that can offer us virtually anything. How easy it would be to submit to that. We also see it's the plan of the enemy to overwhelm us with fear and to woo us with trinkets. I can remember my grandmother, when we go to visit in Blackwater, Virginia, right as we would leave, it was, I want the kids to have something to remember me by, because we didn't go up there a whole lot. And she would save all, this is going to age me a little bit, with the amount of youth we have in here. Back in the day, the cereal boxes had toys in them that were pretty legit toys. Submarines that with baking soda that would dive in the water, some cool stuff. And so she would always have one for me and my brother Christian, and we would think that was the coolest thing. And my mom would always laugh. They don't need those. They're not going to have them in a couple days. And she was right. A couple days, they were tossed off to the side. We were back to G.I. Joes or playing sticks out in the yard. And so I think here it's sort of the same thing. It's like Xerxes is handing out all of the cool cereal box treats to everybody, and they're really cool at the moment. But it's all fleeting stuff that he's offering, just trinkets. And that's what the enemy tries to do to us. If I can't overwhelm you with fear, I'll overwhelm you with stuff. Stuff that seems cool right now. And in a couple days, you've seen the submarine go down and come back up a couple times. You're out of baking soda. Your mom can't make cookies. Or the fish smell is stuck in the refrigerator now because you don't have anything to absorb it. And so that's what the enemy does to us. So we look at the next few verses 5 through 9. It reads, "At the end of this time, the king held a week-long banquet in the garden courtyard of the royal palace for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were present in the fortress of Susa. White and violet linen hangings were fastened with fine white and purple linen cords to silver rods on marble columns. Gold and silver couches were arranged on a mosaic pavement of red feldspar, marble, mother-of-pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in an array of gold goblets, each with a different design. Royal wine flowed freely according to the king's bounty. The drinking was according to royal decree. There are no restrictions. The king had ordered every wine steward in his household to serve whatever each person wanted. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women of King Ahasuerus' palace." So not only did Xerxes have a plan, but he also had the resources for his plan. He thought he had everything to pull it off. Just look at that list again of what he provided. And it wasn't just provided just for the great people, just the nobles and the leaders of the different provinces. It was from the greatest to the least. So whoever Xerxes viewed as the least in all the kingdom, all the 127 provinces, unlimited, no restrictions were offered to them as well. Sometimes when we think of someone with great wealth, trying to share that wealth and show off, we think about them having a select few that they share that with. And everybody else just gets to watch. Xerxes had the resources. He's like everybody. Doesn't matter who it is. Bring them here. Offering it up. The command is there's no restrictions. What do you want? Let me fill that glass up for you again. Folks, the world offers us the same thing every day. The world promises to give us everything and calls on us to live our life, to enjoy all of life with no restrictions. It seems like it becomes more and more available to us all the time. The things that we can go get just like that. Silly example, I just learned this week that McDonald's in Hickson delivers now. That would have blown me away as a child. Happy Meals on demand. Don't even have to go through the drive-thru. If we think about the things that are offered to us that we can get, no problem. It's just like just little trinkets that are being offered to us. And we're promised everything. We constantly hear this talk about there's a generation being built that's entitled. There's generations that we have built up that are entitled at this point. There's this feeling of, we've got this, we want more. And more is available. We can go get it. You just have to do this. Or just have to please this person. And this will be promised to you. We have to be careful of that. We have to be careful of that drink it up. Whatever each person wants is available to them mentality. It's not what God calls us for. So let's look at the limited power of man, because that really showed the great resources that man has that they can offer from the world standpoint. But let's look at verses 10 through 22. On the seventh day, remember this is the seventh day feast that he's offering. On the seventh day, when the king was feeling good from the wine, Ahasuerus commanded Mehuman, you're going to forgive me on this, I was trying to listen to B's every pronunciation to get this right. I'm going to butcher it though. Here we go. Biztha, Arbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, Sarkis, the 7 eunuchs who personally served him, to bring Queen Vashti before him with her royal crown. He wanted to show off her beauty to the people and the officials because she was very beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command that was delivered by his eunuchs. The king became furious, and his anger burned within him. The king consulted the wise men who understood the times, for it was his normal procedure to confer with the experts in law and justice. The most trusted ones were Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan. They were the 7 officials of Persia and Media who had personal access to the king and occupied the highest positions in the kingdom. The king asked, according to the law, what should be done with Queen Vashti, since she refused to obey King Ahasuerus' command that was delivered by the eunuchs. Memucan said in the presence of the king and his officials, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but all the officials and the peoples who are in every one of King Ahasuerus' provinces. For the queen's actions will become public knowledge to all the women and cause them to despise their husbands and say, King Ahasuerus ordered Queen Vashti brought before him, but she did not come. Before this day is over, the noble women of Persia and Media who hear about the queen's acts will say the same thing to all king's officials, resulting in more contempt and fury. If it meets the king's approval, he should personally issue a royal decree. Let it be recorded in the laws of Persia and Media so that it cannot be revoked. Vashti is not to enter King Ahasuerus' presence, and her royal position is to be given to another woman who is more worthy than she. The decree the king issues will be heard throughout his vast kingdom, so all women will honor their husbands from the greatest to the least. The king and his counselors approved the proposal, and he followed Memucan's advice. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each ethnic group in its own language, that every man should be master of his own house and speak in the language of his own people. With all the resources in the world, and with this great plan he had, he couldn't make his wife bow to his wishes. There's an important side lesson for us as exiles here. And the reason that we're going into the book of Esther after going through Peter and the other lessons we've been doing it's really been almost years now if you use fractions. We're talking about being exiles in this world. And we look at this from Xerxes' standpoint. He could change Vashti's location. He could force her into the chambers or force her out of the kingdom. He could change her status. He could make her no longer the queen. He could make her no longer living. He could have executed her. He could not change her mind. Think about that from our perspective. We can be displaced to another area. We could be forced out of the kingdom, not the kingdom of God. We could be taken out of the position that we're in. We could be executed. But with our faith, our mind won't be changed. will still be with God. And God has promises that he fulfills. The world can threaten us, pressure us, or even kill us. But it won't change us unless we let it. In 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. If God is in us, that's where we stand, above anyone of the world. The real question lies in what made Queen Vashti refuse to come before the king after having played her part, knowing that refusing could mean her life. Why did she do this? And the simple answer here is we don't know. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense why she would do that. But it happened. The ultimate answer here is that it was God's will, carried out through providence. It's just normal, everyday decision-making, normal, everyday living. God guided Vashti to that decision. Proverbs 21, verse 1 reads, a king's heart is like channeled water in the Lord's hand. He directs it wherever he chooses. Sometimes decisions are made and we don't understand why. But we have to understand that God is in control. And God has a purpose, and he's delivering us to that purpose. The power of God is on display, demonstrating that regardless of power and resources, God will bring about his purpose, sometimes with great irony. And those that know me, those that have heard me speak, there's times where there's humor in Scripture, and I take great joy in it. The king is not able to control his wife, and so what does he do? He spreads the word that he can't do that. Think about what he was trying to do. He's trying to show that he can conquer everything in the world, and his wife won't do what he asked, and so he goes and asks for advice from folks, and he doesn't see how silly the advice is. Go announce to everyone that it's now a command that you wives follow your husbands, because mine didn't. And I'm the powerful guy that's going to go take the Greeks. It really, if you think about that, it's really silly. His whole big plan he had, and then he's going to go do this. By accepting Memucan's advice, the king ends up publicizing his embarrassing plight by ordering throughout the empire what he himself could not accomplish in his own palace, that every man should be ruler over his own household. Afraid that all women of the empire will hear about Vashti, he ends up assuring what he fears by sending a dispatch to every province of the empire. The blindness in Memucan's advice, as this scene unfolds, gives it a depth of irony and even humor. Sometimes when you create your own plan, you become blind to how silly your actions may be. I tell the youth this often. When I was in high school, my plan was to go play collegiate soccer on scholarship. I was an excellent soccer player at the time. I'm twice the soccer player now that I was then. That was a weight thing. All right? I'm nowhere near as quick as I was before. But there were all sorts of just crazy decisions I was making to make that the plan. And God kept pulling things around and making the path really easy for me to go to Knoxville and go to engineering school, of which I thought engineers just drove trains. That is an honest-to-goodness true story. And so God made that path it kept making it easier and easier, and I kept trying to find a way of, well, maybe I'll go to Bluefield College. If anybody knows where Bluefield, Virginia is, it's on the border of West Virginia, and it is in the middle of nowhere. And it was funny because it started out, it was like you could go play for Duke, or you could play for Maryland, universities people have heard of. And it kept getting the options kept getting smaller and smaller, and I kept trying to force it. And it was to the point where I was looking at some really crazy options, and my mom came to me one day. She came home, and I was crying at the computer. She's like, "What's going on?" And I said, "I honestly feel like I'm making the wrong decision. I don't know what to do." And she laughed at me. I can remember my mother laughing at 18 or 17-year-old Ian, well, if you think you're making the wrong decision and it's upsetting you, why don't you make the right one? It's like, oh, motherly advice. It's all too clear. She prayed with me, and it was just like an overwhelming, yeah, this is easy. Go do this. Xerxes did the same thing here. I'm not comparing myself to him, although there's some similarities. But he had this great plan, and the one thing that he was trying to accomplish, he undermined himself, thinking that he was in control. The threat is real for us to live in this manner. And although there's no one in here that has the wealth to throw a 180-day party to strike up a military campaign, there are those similarities where we have these plans and we're set on those plans and something goes awry in those plans and we sort of lose it. Psalm 37, verses 12 through 15. The wicked person schemes against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him. The Lord laughs at him because he sees that his day is coming. The wicked have drawn the sword and strung the bow to bring down the poor and needy and to slaughter those whose way is upright. Their sword will enter their own hearts and their bows will be broken. So we have to remember that some people's plans are to crush us as Christians, to silence us as Christians. They don't want the word of God to spread. They don't want people to hear how magnificent our God is. And we have to remember that without God, they're going to make silly decisions. And the attacks will be focused towards us sometimes. But this is really, that Psalm 37 is really an encouragement to us. Although they gnash their teeth at us, and they sharpen their swords, and they string up their bows, it says their swords will enter their own hearts, and their bows will be broken. They're helpless without God. We have to remember that regardless of the power that is promised to us or the power that's used to threaten us, regardless of the resources that are stacked up against us or promised to be given to you, there is only so much that the world can offer us. There's a limit to it. Although King Xerxes said no restrictions, there was still a limit to what he could offer. There's probably a reason it wasn't 181 days. There's probably a reason he only had a 7-day banquet. There's only so much he could offer. And then we see his relationship with his wife. He obviously didn't have that going for him. We have to remember that God is in control and he laughs at his enemies. And he's going to demonstrate that power for eternity. But as we're looking at the book of Esther, as we continue in Esther, we're going to see that God continues to do this. And how he does it is he uses just common, everyday things that we do day in and day out. There's nothing miraculous really that happens in Esther here. That's a really good sales pitch, isn't it? Come back next week when nothing miraculous will happen. This is God preserving Christianity. This is God preserving his people. This is God providing Christ to us. This is part of that path. Without these events happening, there's no lineage to Jesus. We have to look at these common means that he uses and understand that he uses them for his redemptive purpose. And that we have to live as exiles. If there's one thing, I said this at the beginning, that we get from this today, it's that God is in control. No matter how much, how intricate, how detailed, how many resources we have for plans, God is still in control. It took a lot of people this morning coming by and reminding me hey, God's with you. I know that. That's what I told Bio this morning. I know it, but I appreciate the reminder. The message I sent David this morning is, David, God's with us. It's a good reminder. Remember that God's not with our enemies. And that no matter how sharp they make their swords, how tight they string their bows, God laughs at our enemies. God is with us. Let's pray.